Yo, what is going on, everyone? My name is Nick, or the Notorious Fantasy, and in today's video, we're going to be breaking down my week number 8 wide receiver start or sit decisions for the 2024 fantasy football season. We're going to be going in depth through every single matchup on the week and discussing whether I would start or sit the wide receivers in every single game from Thursday Night Football all the way up until Monday Night Football. But before we get on into this wide receiver breakdown for the week, I would like to ask that if you guys are new to the channel and you do end up enjoying today's video, that you please make sure to hit that subscribe button down below. And while you're down there, whether you are new to the channel or not, please make sure they do leave a like on today's video. It would help me out a ton. If you want to follow me on Twitter or X, please do so at NotoriousFantasy. So without further ado, let's get into my week number 8 wide receiver start or sit decisions for the 2024 fantasy football season. We begin with Thursday Night Football, the cold-like Minnesota Vikings at the Los Angeles Rams. Now, for the Rams, initially, I did believe that Puka Nacua would be able to play this week, but based on what I have read recently, it feels like it is unlikely that he suits up in this game since he has not been practicing. If the game was on Sunday or Monday even, it would have been a little bit more likely that he plays, but as of right now, I would be shocked if he suited up. And when Cooper Kupp plays, you have to rank him inside of the top 12. There are no ifs, ands, or buts about it. The dude had 21 targets back in week 1 up against the Lions with 14 receptions for 110 yards and a touchdown. Obviously, I have enough brain cells to rub together to where I know that Cooper Kupp isn't going to get 21 targets again, but he could easily get 10 or more. I get the Vikings defense is great, but I think you should still be rocking with Cooper Kupp as a low-end wide receiver 1 when he's healthy. For the rest of the wide receivers on the Rams, Tutu Atwell had 6 catches on 9 targets, 451 yards last week up against the Vegas Raiders, and has been a solid 10 to 13 point player from weeks 3 through 7. But now that Cooper Kupp is back, I would be shocked if Tutu could keep that up, especially up against a tough Vikings defense. And with the fact that his upside isn't very high, I don't want to be playing him. And Demarcus Robinson hasn't done anything of note this season. He hasn't had a game with 50 or more yards since back in week number 2 and had just 9 yards last week. There's no reason to even look his way. For the Vikings, Justin Jefferson continues to print top 18 wide receiver performances weekly. Last week, up against the Lions, he was the wide receiver 5 with 7 receptions on 8 targets for 81 yards and a touchdown. Up against a Swiss cheese LA Rams defense, Jay Jettas, who has scored a touchdown in every single game outside of one this season, he belongs inside of the top 5. For Jordan Addison-Ray, he is always a very interesting wide receiver 3/flex option. He isn't a high-end wide receiver 3 for me due to his volume not really being the best, but the upside is there even if he gets 4 or 5 targets. Back in week 4, we saw the upside come to fruition. He had 3 catches on 4 targets up against the Packers for 72 yards and a touchdown, and he also had 1 rush for a rushing touchdown in a great spot up against the Rams. He is a top 30 wide receiver for me. Jalen Nailor did play well up against Detroit last week as the wide receiver 23, but with Hawkinson seemingly coming back and with Nailor not getting a ton of looks weekly, he is best left on the waivers. Next up, we move to the Sunday slate of game, no London. This week, we begin with the Baltimore Ravens at the Cleveland Browns. Now, Zay Flowers has continued his trend of being certifiably boom or bust. He is either a locked and loaded top 14 option or a player that is so fucking bad that it is genuinely shocking. Last week, in a great spot up against the Buccaneers in Tampa, he was the latter. He had 1 reception on 1 target for 11 yards and 1 carry for 19 yards in a game where for a majority of it, the Ravens laid a pipe to the Buccaneers. It is clear that when the team gets up big, then Flowers' volume and usage is going to drop quicker than the ball on New Year's Eve. So here, if the Browns are able to keep things close with famous Jameis Winston under center, then Zay Flowers could go nuclear. If it is a blowout, then Flowers will be straight up trash. You can't sit Flowers due to the upside alone, so he is a high-end wide receiver 2 for me, but again, the risk is crystal clear. Rashad Master Bateman dunked on the Bucs last week. 4 receptions on 4 targets, 4 for 4, like he was at Wendy's for 121 yards and a touchdown. And honestly, I'll give him some credit. I've always been a Rashad Bateman fan, but he's always let me down. He's looked decent in 3 straight games. Problem is, if he gets just 4 targets in a game weekly, and there are no teams on bye, I just don't think you should trust him as a start. Nelson Agholor is a 2 to 3 target a week guy on a team that has so many weapons loaded to the gills. There is zero need to start him. Jerry Jeudy had just 6 targets last week up against the Bengals in a game where David Njoku had 14, Cedric Tillman had 12, and Elijah Moore himself also had 6 targets. Now, I do believe that Jerry Jeudy is clearly the most talented wide receiver on this team with Amari Cooper now in Buffalo. But with Jameis Winston, he may be just the 3rd best target on the team. With so many unknowns at play here, if I had to play one guy on this team, honestly, it would be Cedric Tillman, who was 8 of 12 for 81 yards. I don't feel super confident, though, so him, Jerry Jeudy, Cedric Tillman, and Elijah Moore are all sits, but I am hopeful that Jameis Winston could right the ship here in Cleveland. Next up, we got the Atlanta Titans at the Detroit Lions. Now, with Jameson Williams suspended for PEDs for 2 games, and with him also being suspended for gambling previously, all he needs to do is just beat someone up and he'll get the Triple Crown. Obviously, that is a joke, so no one should take that too seriously. I hope that he doesn't beat anyone. That would be terrible. I don't like when people beat other people up for no reason, but that was a joke, so hopefully you took it that way and didn't click off the video because I hurt your feelings a little bit. Amon-Ra St. Brown, the real point of things here was the wide receiver won last week, and he shoved his wee-wee down the throat of a great Vikings defense. 8 receptions on 8 targets for 112 yards and a touchdown. 4 straight games he has scored a touchdown in, and I get the Titans defense is underrated, but Amon-Ra St. Brown is still going to elbow drop the Titans defense as a top 8 wide receiver. For the rest of the Lions, without Jameson Williams, I think Tim Patrick could step up as the wide receiver number 2 in this offense. But he hasn't really looked that great this year, so I would rather see it before I blindly believe it. And Khalif Raymond could also do the exact same thing, right? He could become the wide receiver 2 on this team without J-Mo. He's been a top 33 wide receiver in back-to-back games, but I really need to see him blow up and have that big game before I believe it, so I'm just going to sit him and Patrick. Calvin Ridley for the Titans missed practice today on Wednesday with a foot injury, but since it's Wednesday and Wednesday's typically veteran rest day, you shouldn't really panic too much off of Wednesday reports. And if he shows up on the practice report on Thursday as limited, then obviously then you should start to panic a little bit. Even with 9 targets last week in Buffalo, he brought in just 3 targets for 42 yards. The Titans defense allows boatload of points to wide receivers here. But even with D-Hop now in Kansas City, and I shouldn't have said Titans, I guess I meant Bills, right? The Bills defense, the Lions defense, Jesus Christ, I don't know why I just said the Bills because they played the Bills last week, but the Lions defense does allow a lot of points to wide receivers. But again, even with DeAndre Hopkins gone in Kansas City eating barbecue, I am still out on Ridley because the quarterback play is so fucking bad. Tyler, yeah, Boyd is a sneaky good player, but with Mason Rudolph, the red-nosed reindeer under center, I would rather lick a pause in the winter with ice on it over starting any of these Titans wide receivers. Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, even without D-Hop, he should see about 2 to 3 targets a game. There's no reason to look his way. Next up, we move to the "This is our Colts, this is our team, we bleed blue" at the Houston Texans. Now, without Nico Collins, Diggs to me is a comfy top 18 wide receiver play every single week. Last week, he was the exact opposite of that, though, because the Green Bay Packers defense had CJ Stroud playing like he was Josh Rosen, but there's no need to worry. Stephon Diggs is a guy with top 12 upside without Nico Collins. Outside of last week, he has looked very nice, I like, so I'm not going to panic at all. Don't worry after one down game, especially when you get a barbecue chicken matchup up against the Colts defense. Now, Tank Dell, I was ecstatic about Tank Dell. I was drooling the night before the game thinking about how high the upside is with Tank Dell, even up against the Packers defense. I knew the matchup might be tough, but the upside was always going to be there, right? And we saw it the week prior. 7 receptions for 57 yards and a touchdown up against the Patriots. So my hopes were very high. They were sky high. And instead of even a mid showing, right? He didn't just, he got 8 points, or 10, not the best, right? He proceeded to score 0 fucking points, right? Now, I get that Tank Dell hasn't been the best this season, but against the Colts defense, that is no bueno. I got Tank Dell as a high-end wide receiver 3. Xavier Hutchinson, Hutch had just 1 catch last week for 11 yards. We aren't even going to waste our time talking about him. You sit him down. For the Colts, Pittman is basically always hurt, so the fact that he missed practice on Wednesday really isn't surprising at all, but I do assume that he is going to play up against the Texans. With Anthony Richardson back, you would be better off assuming that Pittman just won't do anything at all. It is just easier to operate that way, right? Because if you're going to have such high hopes, right, you think Pittman's a talented player, which I agree with, when Anthony Richardson is playing how Anthony Richardson plays, there's just really no reason to start him. Like, I get he could be fine, right? Because he's going to get 5 or more targets, but the upside is so limited, I just wouldn't chance it. Just like Michael Pittman, Josh Downs missed practice as well with the toe injury that he's also been dealing with for a couple of weeks. But again, he should suit up with Flacco. Downs is a guy that you're giving the Suka Lamink special to. Downs is a guy that you're hitting him with the Gawk 9000 special as a wide receiver 2 with top 10, maybe even top 5 upside. But with Anthony Richardson, Downs was the wide receiver 100 last week. I love Josh Downs, but with Anthony Richardson under center, I'm not going to play him. Alec Pierce might play the game correctly, but he had 5 targets for 2 receptions and 15 yards up against the Fins. Don't expect anything better. Sit him down. Next up, we move to the Green Bay Packers at the Jacksonville Jaguars. But before we break down this game at the wide receiver position, as well as the rest of the games on the Week 8 slate, I would like to give you guys a word from our friends and our partner over at Underdog. Now, if you are new to Underdog and sign up using promo code Notorious or by clicking on the link in the video description, you'll be able to claim your free pick, which today or tomorrow, which today, yeah, technically that would be true. Today or tomorrow would be Matthew Stafford higher than half of a total yard, plus a first-time deposit offer of up to $1,000 in bonus cash. So if you sign up using promo code Notorious or by clicking on the link in the video description, your free pick will be Matthew Stafford higher than half a total yard. You match that with any players in the NBA, any players in the NFL, and if both of the picks hit, as long as they're not on the Rams, then you receive 3 times what you put in. If you put in multiple other picks, then the payout will be higher. If you're watching this on Friday or Saturday or Sunday and Matthew Stafford already played, if you click on the link in the video description or use promo code Notorious, you'll receive a different player in the NBA higher than half a total point or a player in the NFL higher than half of a total yard. So make sure you guys check that out. Link in the video description. So back on into things here. The Packers at the Jacksonville Jaguars. We'll start off with the Jaguars. Brian Thomas Jr. went nuclear in London last week. Wide receiver 4 with 5 receptions on 5 targets for 89 yards and a touchdown. The matchup here, though, does concern me because they just had CJ Stroud struggling big time. He was struggling bigly. But with the correct usage, Brian Thomas Jr. should still be a safe bet to be a mid to low end wide receiver 2. Christian Kirk, I, for one, am just done with this. Now, is Christian Kirk a bad player? Fuck no, baby. And he is a good enough player to bounce back. But it feels like BTJ is the guy, and with Evan Ingram back, the targets just haven't been there. Now facing a tough Packers defense, I just don't see Kirk doing too much considering how down bad he's been over the last 2 weeks. Gabe Davis, there were some people that were like, Nick, did you see how great Gabe Davis was 2 weeks ago? Or I guess the week before, because if you were talking back in week 7. So Nick, did you see how good that Gabe Davis was in week 6 in London? Oh man, he dicked down that Bears defense. He was the wide receiver 7. And I said, a blind squirrel finds a nut every once in a while. Don't worry. Don't just magically throw Gabe Davis into your lineup. The guy fucking sucks ass. And you know exactly what happened. He went back to being a bum as the wide receiver 89. Don't ever start Gabe Davis. For the Green Bay Packers, Jaden Riley-Reed wasn't practicing much last week as he was limited with the ankle injury, which led to his worst performance of the season with 2 receptions on 4 targets for 10 yards. If he is limited this week, I will have to drop him down my rankings since it is only Wednesday again, and I don't panic DEFCON 1 mode. Wee woo, break the glass in case of emergency, right? On Wednesday, I am slightly worried though. Not full on panic mode, but I'm a little bit worried. As of right now, up against a shitty Jaguars defense, I got him as a low-end wide receiver 1. If he isn't practicing yet again, I would have to drop him down to the wide receiver 2 range. Romeo Doubs has been smacking defenses like his name was Jose Aldo. Back-to-back games as a top 13 wide receiver. 8 receptions on 10 targets for 94 yards last week up against the Texans. Against the Jaguars defense, that is as easy as ABC. 1, 2, 3 to defeat. I feel great ranking Romeo Doubs inside the top 30 as a solid wide receiver 3. Dontavian John Wicks for the Packers found the end zone last week with ease. 3 receptions on 6 targets for 48 yards with that touchdown. But with him clearly being the wide receiver 3, and with the fact that the team has a competent pass catching back as well as a competent tight end, I would not feel confident starting Dontavian Wicks or Christian Watson. Next up, we got the Miami Dolphins going up against the Arizona Cardinals in the 305 in Miami. Now, Tyreek Hill with Tua Tagovailoa back in under center. Tyreek Hill slots back in as a must-start wide receiver. He basically said the band is back together in his press conference today and that you need to start him in fantasy football. That's what he said. So I'm going to listen to him, and I'm going to say he's must start. Nick, you're just going to listen to what Tyreek says? I was going to tell you he was a must start regardless of what the motherfucker said, right? I know the times have been tough as a Tyreek Hill owner, as he has basically bent your fucking team over a table since week 2 with just 1 game inside the top 32 in that stretch. But now, with Tua back, I've forgiven him. All is forgotten. Tyreek should be ranked comfortably inside the top 12, and this week I got him inside the top 8 as a clear must-start, no-brainer play. Jalen Waddle with the return of Tua, the return of the king, and in a great matchup up against the Cardinals, Waddle returns to being a top 24 wide receiver in my rankings. Back in week 1 with Tua, he went 5 for 5 for 109 yards and 1 carry for 3 yards. Do I expect Tua to be a little bit rusty? Yes, I do, like a trombone. So I'm not going to sit here and be overzealous and rank Waddle as a top 18 clear, top 12 wide receiver, but as low-end wide receiver 2 for me with high-end top 12 upside, I'm feeling nicey on Jalen Waddle. Odell Beckham Jr. has been back for 2 games and has yet to record a catch. Now, I get the quarterback play is shit, and that's going to change this week. He'll at least catch the ball once. But even so, Tyreek and Waddle being the guys, and with the Dolphins having a great run game, I am out on Odell Beckham Jr. Maserati Marv, more like Mazda Marv, because he's been demoted. The Cardinals are giving Marvin Harrison Jr. the Bijan Robinson treatment from last year in Atlanta. You draft a guy incredibly high with an NFL draft pick. Everyone loves this player. Everyone is sucking this motherfucker dry. And then you proceed not to feature him in the offense. It makes no fucking sense when you consider the other wide receivers on the team are not very good, and it just puts Marv in a bad situation. He is talented enough to any given week be not just a wide receiver 1, the wide receiver 1 in any given game. But with the targets not really being there, them being so dicey, he's a low-end wide receiver 2 for me, especially since Jalen Ramsey could lock him up. Hopefully, they figure this out because it's getting really annoying, right? It's really annoying. Wide receiver 58, 135, and 59 over the last 3 games. Nick, he got hurt in the wide receiver 135 game. Fine. The wide receiver 58 and 59 over the last 2 full games. It's still not good. It still doesn't sound good. Michael Wilson, even with Marvin Harrison Jr. getting the ball at an inconsistent rate, Michael Wilson has had 4 or fewer targets in back-to-back games. I have no interest in starting him or Tyrion Lannister's brother, Greg Dortch, who gets less looks every single game. And next up, we got the New York Jumbo Jets at the New England Deflatriots. Now, in Adams' debut up against the Steelers on Sunday Night Football, he had 9 targets, but only had 3 catches for 30 yards. If he gets 9 targets here, he will be better. I am not worried at all. Adams, to me, is still one of the best wide receivers in the National Football League. I expect the Jets offense to look far better this week up against a better matchup here up against the Patriots. So I am very excited to rank Davante Adams as a lower-end wide receiver 1 to the high-end wide receiver 2 range. Do not panic on Davante Adams. Garrett Wilson, while Adams was down astronomical, Wilson didn't have a great game, but he had 5 receptions on 9 targets for 61 yards. Now, people did shit on the chest, Cleveland Steamer style of Wilson for some aspects of that game, but this matchup reeks of a bounce back for both guys. I think Adams opens the field up for Wilson, and even if Adams is clearly out-targeting him, even if Wilson's targets are dropping like it's hot, I do think that he'll be efficient enough to finish as a high-end wide receiver too. Allen Lazard typically goes crazy in those primetime games, right? He's primetime Allen. But at 1 o'clock, the guy just doesn't really do anything. This week is at 1 p.m., and with Adams there, the targets aren't voluptuous enough like Violet Myers' rack to keep Lazard afloat. He is a clear sit for me. For the Patriots, Demario Douglas was sick last week up against the Jaguars in London, which led to him missing a majority of the second half of the game. Weird, but Douglas had just 2 receptions on 3 targets after having 9 targets in weeks 5 and 6. And while I do believe Douglas is going to be fine now that he's not sick, right? He's going to have a bounce-back game. But not this week. Not this week up against the Jumbo Jets. Drake May, he looks good, but it's a rookie quarterback against a defense like the Jets. It just doesn't give me a lot of confidence. Kayshon Boutte is Boutte, right? 2 to 3 targets a week. Going up against a defense that, sure, I get the Jets defense hasn't been elite recently, but they have the upside to be one of the best defenses in the NFL. You can't play Boutte or Kendrick Bourne, who has basically done nothing. So neither of those Patriots guys are even close. Boutte and Kendrick Bourne are not even close to being startable. DeMario kind of is, but again, with the matchup, I'm just not feeling interested. Next up, we move to the Atlanta Falcons at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, prior to the game that happened up against the Ravens on Monday Night Football for the Buccaneers, I was bricked up thinking about this game. Ooh, we get the Falcons versus the Bucs again. A great matchup from a couple of weeks ago. And oh man, it's going to be fun again. This time, sure, it's not on prime time, but it should still be a back and forth affair, tit for tat, rock'em sock'em robots. But the Buccaneers are banged up to hell. Their wide receiver 1 is probably Jalen McMillan or Sterling Shepard. Could be Rachaad White, though. So this just isn't very nice for the Buccaneers. Jalen McMillan received targets out the wazoo last week with 8, but only had 3 catches for 15 yards and 1 rush for 11 yards. To me, with him struggling to catch the football, I can't rank him very high. Sure, he's ranked as a start, but he's in that fringe start range, right? If you're down bad at wide receiver, you can play him. If you wanted to play Sterling Shepard over McMillan, I would not judge you at all. But with no Mike Evans and no Chris Godwin, the rock has to go somewhere. And even if McMillan has feet for hands, I think he should be good enough to get the job done. Sterling was silent like the night that Santa Claus comes last week with just 1 reception on 1 target for 15 yards. We know Shepard is a decent player from his time in New York with the Giants. Again, between him and McMillan, I'm leaning slightly with McMillan because I think the targets will be more there, but I will have them ranked in a similar range. For the Falcons, Drizzy Drake London, despite the woes, I was running through the 6 with my woes of Kirk Cousins' fantasy football production, Drizzy Drake London has been finger-licking good. 3 straight top 15 performances, and 5 straight games with 8 or more targets, 3 straight with a touchdown, and up against a Bucs defense that just got deep-dicked by the Ravens. I love London this week, and I got him very confidently ranked inside of the top 8. Darnell, here comes the Mooney, to me, will always be a guy I consider in the mid-range wide receiver 3/flex range. He's on an offense that always has the upside to uppercut a defense, and he himself is competent enough at the wide receiver position to get a solid amount of targets. Back in week 5, when these two teams played, he was the wide receiver 3 with 9 receptions on 16 targets for 105 yards, and not 1, but 2 touchdowns in that game. You would be crazier than someone who believes the earth is flat if you expect him to put up that exact same showing, but he could be in the high-end wide receiver 3 conversation, so I like him a decent amount. Ray's targets have went in the opposite direction over the last 2 games, and he seems prior to the last 2 games, like he was a 6+ target guy per week, and now he's just like a 4 target guy. With London and Mooney playing so well and with Bijan looking real good, I don't think you want to risk it with Mr. McLeod. Next up, we got the Philadelphia Eagles at the Cincinnati Bengals, and shocker, you guys want to start A.J. Brown and Jamar Chase, right? It take a fucking rocket scientist to figure that out. When A.J. Brown plays, you play him. In 3 starts this season, dating back to the BBL Bowl back in week 1 in Brazil, he has been a top 7 wide receiver in all games and has scored a touchdown in every single game. 5 receptions on 5 targets last week for 89 yards and a score, putting the Giants defense in the walls of Jericho. And honestly, if they weren't beating down relentlessly on the Giants, and if the Giants had a bit of a fight and didn't throw in the towel, he honestly could have played even better. I believe that this is a game where the Bengals defense that's been playing real good recently ends up falling back down to earth, and A.J. Brown, has yet another top 12 game. He is a top 5 wide receiver. For me, Devontae Smith let me down big time last week, the same way that Rose let down Leonardo DiCaprio in the Titanic by not allowing him to get onto that raft/door thing, even though they both clearly fit, right? If you go back and watch the movie, if you only watched it like when you were a kid and haven't watched it recently, go back and watch. If you're my age and you watched it when you were younger, you might not have remembered this. If you watch the movie, there is clearly room for Leonardo DiCaprio on that raft thing, but instead Rose just takes it all to herself, and it makes the ending of the movie a lot less enjoyable once you realize that, because they both clearly should have fit. If they wanted Leo's character to get whacked, sleeping with the fishes, Luca Brasi style, what they should have done is just made the thing smaller so that you could easily tell, hey, there's not enough room for the both of us, right? But even then, you probably could have just maybe went onto the bottom and then she sat on top of you. I don't fucking know, but doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. So Devontae went from being a clear top 24 option to being the wide receiver 103 in a game where the Giants got face fucked. So I'm not going to panic off of one game. You got to keep rocking with Devontae Smith as a top 20 option. He is in that mid-tier wide receiver 2 range for me. John Dodson is basically invisible, like his name was John Cena, basically seeing no targets. With so many players on the Eagles, Dotson shouldn't even be owned if you're in like a 64-team league. Jamar Chase could be going up against prime-time Deion Sanders or Night Train Dick Lane, and I am firing up Jamar with supreme confidence. Last week in Cleveland, he had 5 receptions for 55 yards and a touchdown, just like A.J. Brown is a clear top 12 wide receiver every single week. That's the same way I feel about Jamar Chase. Now I got him ranked inside the top 5. T. Higgins outperformed Jamar Chase last week with 4 receptions and 8 targets for 82 yards and a tug. His targets have also came more consistently than Deshaun Watson at a massage parlor. 8 targets, 7, 14, and 10 over the last 4 games, and he is a clear high-end wide receiver 2 here. Andre Yoshi Voss is a great player. He really is, but the problem is there's only one football, and you got Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and you have a solid group of tight ends and some solid pass-catching running backs. Yoshi Voss is kind of just chilling in the cuck chair. Next up, we move to the New Orleans Saints at the Los Angeles Chargers to start off our 4 p.m. slate. If you guys have enjoyed today's video thus far, hit that subscribe button like it owes you some money, and leave a like on today's video. It would help me out a ton. So Chris Olave is going to be a start. He was limited in practice on Wednesday with the concussion that he suffered back in week number 6. He missed week 7, but is likely to return this week. Now, without Carr, my excitement for Olave isn't the highest, but without Shaheed, Rattler should force feed the ball enough to Olave for him to be a high-end wide receiver 3. I don't want to get too high on him, though. Bub Beans, I started him last week, and he kicked me in the gonads. 3 receptions on 5 targets for 37 yards. Rattler looked like dog shit, and even in a slightly better matchup here, it's still not a great matchup, so I have no interest in Means with Olave back. Cedric led the team in targets last week, Cedric Wilson Jr., and found the end zone. Great for him. The 0.077% of players that fucking played him, right? Like, no one played Cedric Wilson, and he was the wide receiver 11, which helped absolutely nobody. 6 receptions for 57 yards and a tug. No need to start him, though, in this tough spot. For the Chargers, the Lad McConkey, while the team is just addicted to running the rock, Lad has been seeing a reliable amount of targets weekly. 7 or more targets in 3 straight games, and 7 or more targets in 4 of 6 games. Has me feeling real nicey, like John Gruden about Lad's floor. If you guys don't watch John Gruden's content on TikTok. It's fucking hilarious. The way he, like, if you like football, you'll like those videos. They're super funny. But I feel pretty confident Lad's floor. Now, the upside definitely is limited because the Chargers don't really move the ball that effectively, but I do think Lad is a fine low-end wide receiver 3/flex option. Joshua Palmer was decent last week. He's not as hung as Arnold Palmer. All right, sorry for laughing. Against Arizona, maybe some of you guys didn't think that was funny, but with Lad being did I just say like Arizona? Arnold, did I say Arizona Palmer? Like the guy, like the people that make his iced tea? Arnold Palmer? Did I say it correctly? I hope I did, because otherwise that joke was shit, because I started laughing too. So, but with Lad's the guy, right? Lad's the guy. We got to lock in here. We're 30 minutes into the video. No need to play the wide receiver 2 or 3 on a run-heavy team. Quentin Johnston missed last week after getting banged up the week prior in Denver. Even if it's the return of Quentin Johnston, with Lad seemingly taking the reins here, I will not be playing Quentin Johnston on a run-heavy team. Next up, we got a more fun game, right? That game, not very good. This game gets 2 thumbs up, right? The Buffalo Bills at the Seattle Seahawks. After Amari Cooper drove to Buffalo 7 fucking seconds after getting traded to the Bills, Vin Diesel style, it was all about the family last week, as he was the wide receiver 14 with 4 receptions on 5 targets for 66 yards and a touchdown. Up against the Seattle Seahawks, it isn't the most beautiful matchup on earth, but with him being more integrated into the offense as the weeks go on, and with this game potentially becoming the highest scoring game on the slate, I got Cooper as a mid to low end wide receiver too. Khalil Shakira was the wide receiver 18 last week with 7 receptions on 7 targets for 65 yards. Him on Keon Coleman, in my opinion, are interchangeable in this low end wide receiver 3/flex range. Shakira is the safer bet. Why? Because he gets a safer blanket of targets. But Keon has the bigger build, which is more likely for him to find the end zone. So I will lean more with the safety in my rankings and have Shakir as the start. But if we expanded the criteria of startable wide receivers, if we added a couple more wide receivers to the startable range, then Coleman would also be ranked as a start. For the Seattle Seahawks, Jackson Smith-Njigba is going to be a start. JSN with DK Metcalf more than likely out with the knee injury. JSN should become the number 1 target on the team, and even if Tyler Lockett in my pocket skirt out targets him, he will still be the clear number 2. In Atlanta last week, he had 3 receptions on 6 targets for 9 yards, which isn't good, of course, but while that wasn't the best performance, he should be at minimum, a top 30 guy, and I got him in the low-end wide receiver 2 range because, again, we don't judge just off of one bad performance. Tyler Lockett, even without Metcalf, the upside of him is limited because the guy is, we say this all the time, he's the definition of a business decision. He catches the ball, he's near the sideline, he's not cutting, making a motherfucker miss, and trying to run to the end zone. He's old. He's just going to walk out of bounds, right? Or if he catches the ball in the middle of the field and there's some angry motherfucker coming his way looking to hit stick him, he's just going to lay down. He's going to slide. He protects himself at all times, like what they tell you at the beginning of a UFC or a boxing fight, right? Since the upside is just not all that high, he is a low to mid-range wide receiver 3/flex. But the targets alone keep him as a reliable top 36 option without Metcalf. Jake Bobo has an awesome name, and he should slot in as the wide receiver 3 here. But the guy, I get he's a decent player, but with Lockett and JSN in front of him, and with the emergence of Noah Fant, there is no reason to play Jake Bobo. Next up, we move to the Chicago Bears at the left. Hands up. Who are we? The Commanders. Now, with Caleb Williams cooking like his name was Gordon Ramsay in the kitchen, this has made Moore move up the rankings in a big way. Last week, prior to the bye week, up against Jacksonville in London, we didn't see a big game out of Moore. Sadly, Caleb played great, but he didn't have a great game. He had just 4 receptions on 5 targets for 20 yards. But back in week number 5, he had a much better showing. He was one of the best wide receivers on the week. Up against Carolina, he had 5 receptions on 8 targets for 105 yards, and not 1, but 2 touchdowns in that game. Facing up against a not-so-hot Commanders defense, that is one of the worst against the pass. I expect Moore to be at least a high-end wide receiver 2 on the week. Keenan Allen, prior to the bye, when DJ Moore was sleeping like his name was Snorlax in London, Keenan was the wide receiver numero 9 with 5 receptions on 5 targets for 41 yards and 2 touchdowns. He is a solid wide receiver 3 going forward. As to me, it does really feel like he's the wide receiver 2 on the team, even though I do still really believe that Rome is better than him. Rome has had 5 or fewer targets in 4 of 6 games and fewer than 4 targets in 3 of 6 games. Even with my belief that he's better than Keenan Allen, the team doesn't think that, so we just have to rock with Keenan Allen. For the Commanders, whether or not Jaden Stormy Daniels ends up playing, I still will rank Terry as a top 24 wide receiver. With Mariota, last week he was the wide receiver 16 with 6 receptions on 6 targets for 98 yards, and has been a top 28 wide receiver in 5 straight games, and a top 16 wide receiver in 4 of 5 games. Now up against the Bears, and probably without the QB1, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that he is some safe bubble wrap type of play. He's too skilled to sit, though, but my confidence level is far lower than normal, especially up against the Bears, so I got him as a low-end wide receiver, too. Noah Brown, to me, looks like the number 2 receiver on this team, but against the Bears defense, you would have to be smoking some crack to play Noah here. And with Luke McCaffrey, he had 0 targets last week and averages like 2 a game. You're not starting a 2-target-a-game guy with Marcus Mariota under center. Next up, we got the Panthers at the Denver Broncos, and we're going to keep it simple, stupid. Use the KISS method. Bryce Young is back under center, so Deontay Johnson has to go back to the bench until Fire Crotch, the Red Rifle, returns. I hope he is okay from that car crash. Last week, Deonta was locked up like his name was Diddy. 1 reception on 3 targets for 17 yards against the Denver Broncos, up against a Denver Broncos defense that could strike fear into your heart. And with Bryce Young likely getting plowed like his name is Skybree, I will not be playing Deontay Johnson. Without Dalton, Leggett, also useless. The talent has been there, and he has flashed like a Girls Gone Wild video. But up against Denver and with Young under center, fuck no, baby. Jalen Cocker, I barely knew her, is barely a solid player. He's clearly behind DJ and Leggett in the target hierarchy. I'm not going to play either Deontay Johnson or Leggett, who are more talented, so you're definitely not playing Cocker. Sutton put up a goose egg in week 7 at New Orleans. 0 targets for 0 receptions, and you guessed it, 0 yards. I like Bo Nix. And I like the upside of this offense, but with a suspect amount of targets weekly, fluctuating up and down so often, I'm not playing Sutton. Troy Franklin looked good last week with 5 receptions on 6 targets for 50 yards up against the Saints. If Franklin rips off another top 32 game, I will have to start putting some respect on his name. But as of right now, especially like with no teams on bye, I'm just not going to get cute and play him. The Vaughn Bell, if I'm not starting Sutton or Franklin, who have more talent in their left nut than Bell does, I'm not going to be playing Vel. Next up, we move to game number 14, which is the final game before Sunday Night Football and then Monday Night Football. We got the Kansas City Chiefs at the Las Vegas Raiders. Worthy led the team in targets last week against the 49ers, but only scored 5 fantasy points. 3 receptions on 8 targets for 19 yards and 1 rush for 5 yards. Even if D-Hop suits up, I do believe Hop will be the wide receiver 1 in Kansas City this week. He is an incredibly volatile player. No one should be believing that Worthy is safe. He's just not. He's nothing short of boom or bust. But I do believe Hop will become the wide receiver 1, but not this week. So up against the Raiders defense, I got him as a wide receiver 3/flex play, because if he scored 25 points up against the bum Raiders defense, no one would be surprised. But I also wouldn't be surprised if he got like 3 points. Now, D-Hop's a start. He did get traded for today, which means his likelihood of playing is up in the air. If he does play, I think he will get enough targets to be a low-end play, especially because the Raiders defense sucks donkey cock. Donkey? Shout out to Shrek. Wouldn't say I love him here, though. But if you're down bad, you can start him. Justin Watson, without Juju, Watson should be the 2nd or 3rd most targeted wide receiver on the team. But I use the word should loosely, right? Not will, but should? Should? Because Watson had 1 target last week and probably going to get like 0 to 3 weekly, so you're not going to play him. Jacoby Myers returned to practice today with the ankle injury that he's been dealing with. If he does suit up in most matchups, even with how bad the Raiders are, I really do like Jacoby Myers because the targets come often and early like a gooner. But against the Chiefs' rock-hard defense, my interest level has diminished. Trey Tucker had 8 targets last week and didn't do anything. With Jacoby seemingly back and with the defensive matchup not being the best, I'm not touching Tucker with a 10-foot pole. DJ Turner, just like Tucker, got a boatload of targets, but had just 2 catches off of them for 13 yards. Just like Trey Tucker, we will say the Kembe no to DJ Turner. Next up, we move to the Dallas Cowboys at the San Francisco 49ers on "Cause You Waited All Day for Sunday Night." Now, if you want my Dallas Cowboys rant, I had it last night in the quarterback starts hit video. So if you want to see me get real mad, real angry about football, watch that video because I'm just not going to do it again. Despite the fact that the Cowboys offense looked like a toilet in a porta potty after a couple hours of usage, and it smelled like shit up against Detroit prior to the bye, CD was still the wide receiver 19 with 7 catches on 14 targets for 89 yards. And while I know damn well Dickie Dak Prescott is going to shrivel up like your cock when you hop into a cold tub, I still can't sit Lamb. I think he could be a top 5 wide receiver here, and I got him ranked inside of the top 8. Jalen Tolbert has flashed times of greatness, multiple times this season. And I think if I could trust Dak, I would like Tolbert because this could be a high-scoring game. But with how Dak looked last time out and with how Dak performs historically against good teams, I would rather just turn the other cheek and look for a different wide receiver. And then they've got Kevontae Turpin, who had 7 targets in his last game, but only a couple of those came with Dak. Most of them came when they waved the white flag and threw Cooper Rush into the game, so no need to play Turpin. For the 49ers, Juwan Jennings was out last week with the hip injury and missed practice today on Wednesday with, you guessed it, the hip injury. This is a situation to monitor, but with Ayuk out and Debo most likely not in, you gotta be excited about Jennings if he starts because he will be the wide receiver 1. I don't think he's a stone cold lock to be a top 12 wide receiver, but the upside is definitely there. We've seen it a couple of weeks ago, and he should see enough volume to be a low-end wide receiver 2 to the high-end wide receiver 3 range. If you have Juwan as your flex, you would definitely be ecstatic about him. Ricky Pearsall. This man got shot a couple of weeks ago and is the healthiest wide receiver on the team. In his debut up against the Chiefs, he had 3 catches on 5 targets for 21 yards. If Jennings misses, then Pearsall, or Pearsall, however you want to pronounce his name, will be in that wide receiver 3 range. If Jennings is in, I want to see Pearsall play before I bite the bullet and start him. Jacob Cowing is a fine option as the wide receiver 3 on the team. Like in real life, right? He's a fine wide receiver 3. I'm not going to sit here and suck the guy's metaphorical cock here and say, oh, he's amazing, but he's fine. He's a good kick returner. But in fantasy football, that doesn't really mean anything, so you're going to sit him. Final game here, game number 16 on the week, Monday Night Football, the Giants at the Steelers. Now, Malik Willis was on the struggle bus last week against the Eagles with just 4 receptions on 8 targets for 41 yards. Prior to that, he had 12 or more targets in 3 of 4 games to start out the season. Now, he was coming off the injury, so maybe that had him a little bit shook up, but I don't really think a concussion should do that. But again, I'm not a doctor. The Steelers' defense is great, but if Neighbors goes back to his old ways and gets the ball jammed just down his throat like his name was Julia Ann, I think he can bounce back as a top 12 wide receiver, and he should be a safe bet to return to the top 24. Juan Dale, his target share is insane, but he has received 9 or more targets I almost said in 8 straight games, in 4 straight games, which is good. But the problem is the Steelers' defense is really good, and with the fact that Wandale's not really a great player, he just gets a lot of targets. Doesn't really make me want to start him. Next week up against Washington, though, he will be a starter because the matchup is just way better. Darius Slayton with Neighbors back. Slate went back to his old ways of being just a few targets per week guy. With Daniel Jones looking blinder than a bat, no need to play Slayton, especially in this matchup. For the Steelers, George Pickens has risen from the dead like Frankenstein or like Post Malone in the Goodbyes music video with Young Thug. Thugga Thugga bitch. Wide receiver 2 last week against the Jets, which is very good because the Jets defense is very good. 5 receptions on 9 targets for 111 yards and a touchdown. Round of applause. That was fucking awesome, right? Best game on the season by far. While it's very unlikely that he finishes in the top five wide receivers again, I think as long as they're starting Russie, then Pickens will be a mid-range wide receiver 2 to low-end wide receiver 2 weekly. Because again, we do know Russell Wilson does have like the bad games in him, right? One great game shouldn't make us buy completely in. Now, I'm going to say the exact same thing about Calvin Austin and Van Jefferson as I say about him and them every single week. Both of these guys are quick. They are very, very fast. So magically, every once in a while, they will have a touchdown and have like a top 30-ish game, which is cool, right? A top 30-ish game is cool. But even with Russ under center, the projection of when it will actually happen is so hard to figure out. It's not like they're seeing 8 targets a week, right? They just need that touchdown to get over the top. They don't. So, and again, they both kind of do the same thing, which makes it hard to read which guy's going to do what. And with the run game looking a lot better, no reason to play Calvin Austin or Van Jefferson. So thank you guys all so much for watching today's video. If you ended up enjoying, make sure you guys hit that subscribe button down below like it owes you some money. Make sure that you guys do leave a like on today's video. It would help me out a ton. If you want to follow me on Twitter or X, please do so at NotoriousFantasy. Make sure you guys do check out Underdog, promo code Notorious to claim your free pick tomorrow, or today if you're watching it maybe on Thursday. You got Mr. Matthew Stafford higher than half of a total yard, plus a first-time deposit offer of up to $1,000 in bonus cash. I love you guys all more than you will never know, or never know more than you will ever know. I hope you guys have a great one. Shout out Wayne Gretzky. As always, good boy.